questions in turn. So who would like to take the first question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Peter Semler, Capital Intelligence Group. My question is, we've been working in Tunisia since the first day of the elections after the revolution. And my question is, how can the IMF make Tunisia into a safe haven or safe harbor investment scenario, sort of like the Austria or Switzerland of Africa and the Middle East? I mean, it has a good democracy representative, it's stable, and I think the image of Tunisia as unsafe has been something that's hurting the country more than anything. You have the EBRD, you have the US, new OPEC, USDFC, you have the IFC, then you have the IMF. So you have a lot of international partners, and people are making good investments there and good return on investments like General Electric, Japanese. How can IMF get the profile of Tunisia into the world? Yeah. Better show the safe haven aspects of that economy.
Yes. Shall I? So we take one question at a time, right, Amra? Right,
yes.
Wafa?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for that question. And so you raise a very good point, and this was something that was also covered in some of our meetings with the private sector, where they actually said that Tunisia is an attractive place to invest in many respects, and I mentioned the proximity to Europe and the educated workforce. And the entrepreneur said, we know that, but not enough entrepreneurs outside Tunisia or who have not yet invested in Tunisia know that. So that needs to be mentioned more and needs to be broadcast more to the rest of the world, that Tunisia is an attractive investment place. They do mention a few constraints, such as the logistics and the bureaucracy, that can be a constraint and that should be tackled. And some also mentioned some issues with the tax regime. So to answer your question, there is a lot of potential in Tunisia. It needs to be, let's say, broadcast more, and I think the authorities can play a role there in promoting Tunisia more as a destination. So I would say that is a main factor. But beyond that, we list a whole set of areas for reform where, if these are implemented, Tunisia will be a stronger place for investment. And we do talk about opening up monopoly sectors for private investment. We talk about green investments and so on. And when it comes to opening monopolies, this is not just for the public monopolies, but also private monopolies that could benefit from more private sector participation and from more competition. And so these are all areas that the authorities need to be work on to further make Tunisia an attractive place for investment. This will also improve more broadly the competitiveness of the country and productivity of the country. Again, lots of potential, but there needs to be worked on, both on the image of Tunisia. You mentioned this safety. That is something that the authorities, of course, have been paying a lot of attention to. And then I would say more broadly, the investment environment where more work is needed. And we touch on several points there in the report. And also our development partners like the World Bank are working on improving the investment climate. Thank you. Jobs and growth. In our discussions, we were struck by the large economic potential of Tunisia, with its proximity to the European market and the strong technical skills of its well-educated workforce, such as engineers and IT specialists. We were also struck by the strong potential in Tunisia of investing in the green economy and the digital economy to create jobs. Increasing private sector participation can be done by opening monopolies to private sector competition, by eliminating bottlenecks in infrastructure, such as the ports, and also by reducing bureaucracy and red tape. Third recommendation is to reform state-owned enterprises. We recommend that the authorities develop a reform strategy that evaluates the role of public enterprises in the economy, that centralizes their oversight, that strengthens their corporate governance, and that improves the transparency of their finances. The fourth recommendation is to reduce the public deficit, to bring back public finances on a sustainable path over the medium term. When you look at the report that we just published, you will see that we jointly developed two scenarios, a baseline scenario and what we call in the report a reform scenario. And that is a scenario that illustrates how the finances can be brought back to a sustainable path. So we show that it is possible to do that. The fifth recommendation is for the central bank to focus on achieving low and stable inflation, as inflation is a tax that affects the poor relatively harder. In addition, we strongly recommend that the central bank avoid monetary financing of the deficit and that it allows the exchange rate to adjust to market developments. We also recommend that the central bank continue to monitor closely the financial sector for signs of distress of borrowers and non-performing loans. Sixth and finally, we recommend that the authorities redouble their efforts for good governance and transparency, and also in the fight against corruption. Improvements in these areas will create trust in the public sector. It will reduce wasteful spending and attract investment, and so will help growth and job creation. With these remarks, I invite you to ask any question you may have, and I thank you.
Chris, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Wafa, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining this press conference today to discuss the conclusion of the 2021 Article IV report on Tunisia. As Wafa said, my name is Chris Geiregat. I'm the Mission Chief for Tunisia at the International Monetary Fund. And today I'm joined by my colleague, Jérôme Vacher, who is the IMF resident representative in Tunis. In late December and early January 2021, our IMF team held a virtual mission during which we met with the Tunisian authorities, representatives of the public and private sector, and civil society. This was an opportunity for us to discuss the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Tunisian economy, look at the challenges ahead, and also discuss and exchange ideas on policy measures. The IMF does those visits with each of its 190 members, typically once a year, and these are called Article IV Consultation missions. Thus, in short, the Article IV mission in Tunisia, which we just concluded, was a mission to take the pulse of the economy. It was not a program negotiation mission. So what were our main findings? I will first cover the current economic situation and then look at the short-term perspectives. It is clear that 2020 was an exceptionally difficult year for Tunisia, and we mourn the more than 8,000 lives lost and counting to the COVID-19 pandemic. In economic terms, the Tunisian economy experienced its deepest contraction since independence, with a decline in economic activity of more than 8%. At the time of our mission, we estimated the contraction to be 8.2%. Recent data shows that the contraction was even worse at 8.8%. Unfortunately, this deep recession has also resulted in setbacks in unemployment, where employment fell and unemployment increased, and also in the fight against poverty, especially affecting youngsters and women. The Tunisian authorities provided support to the health sector, to vulnerable populations and businesses, and to the banking sector. And this support helped mitigate the impact of the pandemic on the economy and on its people. As a result of the crisis, the budget deficit increased to more than 10% of GDP. This in turn led to a jump in public debt from 72% of GDP in 2019 to over 85% in 2020. For 2021, so looking ahead now, we expect a modest rebound in economic activity by about 3.8%. That said, there are large risks around this projection, mainly due to the uncertainty around the duration and intensity of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also due to the speed of the vaccination campaign. So a lot will depend on that for 2021. Now, just like the Tunisian authorities, we believe that Tunisia is facing two immediate challenges in 2021. The first challenge is to save lives and livelihoods, to soften the impact of the crisis on the vulnerable. And these efforts should continue until the pandemic is over. Thus, it is critical that the authorities continue to spend on social programs to reach those who need support, as well as on the health sector and on the vaccination campaign. Similarly, the authorities can support a job-rich recovery and higher growth by making room in their budget for investment, especially investment in health, education, and infrastructure. The second challenge facing Tunisia in 2021 is that the public finances should be brought back to a sustainable path. To put it simply, the public debt and deficits should be brought to more sustainable levels. This will remain a challenge for the coming years ahead. So I mentioned that there are two immediate challenges. One, to spend on social programs and health to save lives and livelihoods while boosting investment to support the recovery. And two, to start reducing debt and deficits. How can we achieve both? This can be done by a strict prioritization of public spending. On the one hand, in favor of social protection, health, education, and infrastructure, and on the other hand, by strictly controlling the civil service wage bill, so the overall envelope for the civil service wage, which is currently among the highest in the world in percent of GDP. Also, this can be achieved by reducing wasteful subsidies, especially energy subsidies, which are poorly targeted and benefit mostly wealthier Tunisians. And finally, by strictly controlling transfers to poorly state-run, state-owned enterprises. Next, let's look at Tunisia's outlook for the medium term. When we look at the economic performance of Tunisia over the past decade, it is clear that growth was too low and that the economy did not create enough jobs, especially for youngsters and women. In short, we believe that Tunisia needs a new direction, a direction which is different from that from the last decade. We believe and agree with the Tunisian authorities that Tunisia's economic future will depend on the adoption of an ambitious reform program that puts the economy in this new direction. Such a program should be developed by the Tunisian authorities themselves. For such a program, such a reform program, to be acceptable in the eyes of Tunisian society and international development partners, it would be important to also communicate this plan to the Tunisian people and engage in a national dialogue. Indeed, difficult reforms can only succeed when everybody understands how this will benefit society in terms of better social protection, more inclusive growth, more and better jobs, and less poverty. even if the adjustment can be painful in the short term. In other words, the success of difficult reforms will depend on the support and buy-in from Tunisia's main partners. That is, across the political spectrum, across employers and employees federations, and across other groups in civil society. We call that support a social compact. And in practice, it means that if everyone agrees to have an open mind and give in a little, then everybody would gain from the new direction in the economy. Again, with better social protection, more inclusive growth, more and better jobs and prosperity. Finally, I wish to briefly touch on the main policy recommendations in the report. These recommendations cover 6 broad areas. The first one, and I've already touched on it before, is to strengthen social protection and increase public investment, especially in health, education, and infrastructure, and this to support growth and create jobs. To create room for these priorities, future budgets will need to strictly manage the civil service wage bill, reduce wasteful